Alright, well this will be my first political video, and I'm going to really kind of break down one of the topics that's really coming on into the main focus right now, and that is the topic of the 2020 election, and more specifically at this period, the Democratic primary. So really, what I see developing, what I'm really going to break down is what I kind of see is I see that the most likely scenario for the 2020 election is going to be Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump. And the reasons that I think that is there are a lot of reasons, but really I think that there are certain vibrations in the political world, in political reality, if you will, to where you can kind of detect when a certain politician is sort of caught on and when certain ideas are sort of taking off. And really what I'm kind of seeing is I'm really seeing that now with the Bernie Sanders crowd, that I think that the political tides are sort of shifting in their direction. And because of that, I think that you're going to see Bernie jettison into the 2020 election regularly, and he's going to have a pretty good chance to win. I'm not saying he is going to win, but I'm saying he's going to have a good chance. Um, so there are a lot of reasons I think that. So I'm going to kind of go into some of the main things that I noticed that are really serving as sort of bellwethers for this kind of success. And the first thing that I'm going to look at is one of the main things that I've noticed as a trend for politicians in the modern era. Is one way you can really start to tell if a politician is starting to take off is you've got to look at their level of success on the internet. And you can go back and look at some of the past politicians that have been successful. We look at Donald Trump, we look at Barack Obama, and you can see in both of their respective election cycles, they developed a large internet following. And in contrast to that, the politicians that's failed, Hillary Clinton, Mitt Romney, John McCain, they had virtually no internet following. There was virtually no one making videos about them. There were no channels. I mean, of course, there was the regular commentators, but there wasn't an internet following. But if we look at Donald Trump, he had, the people on 4chan and Reddit. He had YouTube, cranking out memes. It was the meme machine. Meme warriors, meme magic is what they called it. This kind of thing, it propelled Donald Trump. And it wasn't the only factor, but it was a bellwether that kind of signaled that he was taken off as an idea and a politician. And even if you go back to Barack Obama in 2008, we saw the same thing. I mean, we looked at something like Obama Girl. It was a little meme video kind of thing that developed in 2008. Those kind of videos were being made about Obama, whereas they weren't being made about Clinton. They weren't being made about John McCain. And these things, again, they were bellwethers that popular culture had kind of connected to this particular candidate. So we start to see that with Bernie Sanders now. We start to see that he's developed a lot of internet following on YouTube, whereas most of YouTube has gone very right-wing. We see that Bernie has kind of developed this whole social, democratic, apparatus network of people that are just supporting him, and we see that that is a blip. I mean, it is really coming into focus right now. Is I don't see at this point any other candidate besides maybe Andrew Yang that has developed a similar kind of internet following. But of course, Yang's following is more of an ironic kind of following, sort of, not really a serious kind of thing. Another factor is we see that Bernie, very similar to Donald Trump, is tapping into an anti-establishment sort of working class appeal. And when you tap into that sort of appeal, that's something that is really on fire right now. And that is going to make him very competitive in not only the Democratic primary, but of course, later on down the road, when he starts taking on Donald Trump in some of those swing state, Midwestern swing states that Donald Trump, of course, won with. Now, lastly, again, we can look at youth following, which is very important. He has a very strong youth following. Again, very reminiscent of Barack Obama. But of course, that's not the only factor that wins. But I would say another very important factor is the fact that the Democratic primary as a whole is very divided. So it's going to be just like very similar to the Republican primary in 2016. We saw a very divided field of Republicans, the establishment just dividing everything, and you saw this anti-establishment figure that could come in and just kind of beat everybody because the vote was divided. I think you're going to start to see something like that with Bernie Sanders as well. I think he'll be able to take advantage of a divided vote, of divided superdelegates, and that will, in a way, start to propel him into the 2020 election. Now, at this stage, I'm a supporter of Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump. So, of course, I have to discuss, well, what do I think the factors are for Bernie Sanders once he gets into the battle with Donald Trump? Do I think Donald Trump's going to win? Is Bernie going to win? Well, at this stage, I'm saying that I give the advantage to Bernie at this point because I think that a lot of the factors that made Donald Trump such a dynamic candidate are kind of nullified by Bernie. And also, I feel like a lot of those factors have also been kind of reduced with Trump. They're not as strong as they were in 2016. And those factors are some of the things I mentioned before. That's working class support, it's internet support, it's a divided field, it's the anti-establishment sentiment, those kind of things. Bernie can do all those things just like Trump can do them. And not only that, all those things are diminished now for Trump. In terms of internet following, I mean, there is still a internet Trump following. I mean, do not get me wrong, that is there. It's still going to be a factor in 2020. But we see now that a lot of the personalities that were supporting him in 2016 are not as enthusiastic as they were. We're talking about Steve Bannons, we're talking about Milos, Ann Coulters, we're talking about the alt-right. These people on the internet that were just so fired up and enthusiastic about Trump, a lot of them are now saying Trump's maybe a little bit of a cuck. You know, they're saying that maybe he shills a little bit too much for the establishment. You know, things like that. And for that reason, you know, his internet support is not as strong as it was. Whereas Bernie's internet support is just coming into focus. In terms of working class support, I mean, in a way, it's sort of a toss-up. I mean, Bernie might have an advantage because he's got the whole socialist angle. It's all built around the working class. So again, that area is nullified as well. And also in terms of being anti-establishment, I mean, Trump has now been in the White House for 4 years. And of course, he isn't totally the establishment, but he's not as anti-establishment as he was. And he can't really run on that angle against Bernie Sanders because it just, frankly, would not work in the same way. And so ultimately, Bernie does have all of these advantages. So, for that reason, I will give Bernie the initial advantage. Now, the Trump card for Trump, something that really I think is ultimately his only shot in a way, is I feel like he has to make this election about capitalism versus socialism. And I mean, it really does have to be that way because it's really the only angle that Trump can really run on. And so essentially what I think ultimately what Trump needs to do, and it's kind of Machiavellian, is he needs to tie Bernie Sanders to socialism, which he already is, and he needs to tie socialism to Venezuela, and then he needs to find a way to tie Bernie Sanders and Venezuela together. And then he needs to escalate the situation in Venezuela. So essentially, what he does is you escalate the situation in Venezuela, escalate anti-socialist sentiment in the United States, and you label Bernie as an unpatriotic traitor who's favoring a Venezuelan dictatorship. Now, of course, Bernie can separate himself from Venezuela. I said that's not what I'm advocating. And of course, that's something that Bernie can win on. And I think it's a very difficult strategy. But ultimately, I think that is ultimately what Trump has to do, is he has to tie Bernie to Venezuela, and he has to run on that socialist angle. So really, I mean, am I going to make a prediction at this point? No, I'm not. A lot could happen. I mean, the establishment Democrats could block out Bernie again. You know, maybe something down the road we don't see. But right now, I think it's going to be Trump and Sanders for the 2020 election, and I give the advantage initially to Bernie Sanders. But Trump does have a Trump card, and he does have some cards that he can play. So this is my first video. I hope you enjoyed it, and subscribe and like if you feel so inclined. Thank you.